Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly past the veil of mainstream history, tiptoeing into the flickering candlelight of a chamber where the stars whisper secrets, and not the kind you'd find in your horoscope app. You're not just reading your zodiac tonight. No, you're walking into the hidden world of ancient astrologers, the kind of place where the moon matters more than logic, your birth chart might be illegal. And Mercury? Mercury is always retrograde, emotionally. You're here for the forbidden rules, the unspoken ones, the ones passed in hushed tones behind temple curtains or scratched into the back of a fig leaf ledger. And no, you probably won't survive this, especially if you ask the wrong question during a lunar conjunction or mistake Saturn for a slightly tired goat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are barefoot on the cool tiles of a shadowy corridor. Incense curls around your ankles like it knows something you don't. You follow the scent, cinnamon, frankincense, and something faintly like old cheese, and it leads you to a wooden door marked only by a faded constellation of dots. No name, no knock. You just push, and it opens. Inside, a man in a robe that smells like sleep and dried papyrus stares at you. He does not speak. He just knows. That's the thing with astrologers. They always seem to know too much and yet explain too little. He gestures for you to sit, and you do, on a cushion that's surprisingly prickly and smells suspiciously like goat. He lights another candle, then begins to hum. Not a melody, more like a cosmic dial tone. You glance around the chamber. Scrolls stacked in haphazard towers. Wax tablets etched with looping glyphs. A clay figurine of a lion wearing a frown. And in the center, a star chart the size of your torso, drawn in gold leaf and panic. You open your mouth to speak, but he waves a wrinkled hand. No questions yet. Not until he's checked your planetary alignment, your moon sign, your breath pattern, and the way your left foot twitches when you're anxious. Which it is. Very much so, right now. He pulls out a reed stylus and begins scribbling, muttering phrases like Mars disgruntled, Venus sulking, and Jupiter looks smug again. He sighs deeply. You were born on a confusing day, he says finally, the kind that irritates the heavens. You nod solemnly. You've irritated worse. He squints at you through smoky light. Do you know the first forbidden rule? He asks. You shake your head. He leans in. His breath smells like raisins and secrets. Man, never try to predict your own future, he whispers. The stars don't like arrogance. And besides, you'll lie to yourself. Everyone does. You blink. He's already scribbling again. The room creaks. The candle flickers. A scroll unrolls itself with a thud. You're not sure what you've gotten yourself into. But one thing's clear. This isn't just some medieval BuzzFeed quiz. This is serious. This is astrology with consequences. And you're in it now. You sit cross-legged, nervously watching the astrologer pace the room. Every few seconds, he mutters something about retrograde tantrums and the audacity of Sagittarius. He's holding your chart like it personally offended him, which, to be fair, it kind of did. Then he stops. Rule number 2, he says, without turning around. The stars aren't for everyone. You blink. You thought astrology was supposed to be for anyone with a birthday and emotional baggage. No, he sighs. Not everyone is allowed to know their fate. He walks over to a high shelf and carefully pulls down a dusty box sealed with string and what appears to be a cat hair. He opens it to reveal a second hidden chart. This one's not about you. It's grander, more ornate. A royal natal chart, maybe. Definitely not peasant grade. He explains in a tone equal parts teacher and conspiracy theorist that in many ancient civilizations, Babylon, Egypt, even early Greece, the stars were a state secret. Astrological knowledge was guarded like gold. Only high priests, temple scribes, and court appointed sky nerds were permitted to chart the heavens. You're a regular person, and regular people weren't even allowed to know where the moon was last Tuesday, let alone whether Venus was being petty in your birth hour. He leans in close, like he's about to share a really juicy rumor. Did you know, he whispers, that in some Mesopotamian courts, giving an incorrect horoscope could be punishable by death? You choke slightly on your own spit. He nods. One wrong prediction, and boom, you're offering your liver to the gods in person. You begin to understand. Astrology wasn't for fun back then. It was for kings, for war, for taxes. A bad reading could start a famine panic. A good reading could justify an invasion. If Mercury blinked wrong, someone might lose a city. And don't even get me started on eclipses, he groans. If you looked at one without permission, that was practically espionage. He walks to the window and gestures up toward the night sky. See that? Infinite knowledge. But you only get what you're allowed to get. The rest, he taps his head and smiles like a lunatic librarian. Outside, you hear the faint sound of drums, probably another celestial ritual, or maybe someone just dropped a goat again. Either way, you're starting to realize the sky isn't free. It never was. The astrologer returns to your side, peering at you like a museum exhibit that somehow wandered into the wrong century. You're lucky, he says. Most people live their whole lives never knowing the rules, never realizing they're not supposed to read the stars, that it's prohibited, controlled, treated like contraband. He pulls open a drawer, revealing small, carved moon tokens wrapped in velvet. These, he says, were outlawed during the Ptolemaic period. Too accurate. People started asking too many questions. You're not sure if he's being dramatic or if you've accidentally joined a celestial crime ring. Either way, he presses a token into your palm and grins. You didn't hear this from me. You nod slowly, as if being handed illegal moon jewelry is something that happens all the time. Then he raises one eyebrow. You're going to want to keep that hidden. You tuck it into your robe like a medieval smuggler. The token feels cold, weighted, like it knows something about your future, and it's choosing to keep quiet. Outside, a shooting star streaks across the sky. The astrologer doesn't look up. Not for you, he murmurs. You barely slept last night. Maybe it was the forbidden moon token burning a hole in your robe pocket. Or maybe it was the astrologer's stare, like a man who had read your horoscope and wasn't impressed. Either way, you're back in his chamber, sitting exactly where he told you to, which happens to be on top of a zodiac chart painted directly on the floor. You're currently on Pisces. It feels vaguely damp. He enters without a word, holding what looks like a medieval lunchbox. Actually, a cedar case filled with the sacred tools of the trade, except this trade also involves astral subterfuge. He lays them out dramatically, one by one. A bronze compass, so finely etched, it makes your head hurt to look at. A wand carved from yew wood, topped with a small sapphire that blinks when you lie. A wax tablet engraved with a grid So complex, it might just be a cheat code for life. These, he says, are not for public use. You nod solemnly, mostly because you're not sure what else to do. He hands you the compass. It points nowhere, which you're told is actually good. It means you haven't offended Jupiter yet. Then the wand. You touch it. It hums. He frowns. Mild guilt. That tracks. You try not to confess anything. Finally, he lifts the wax chart, carefully, reverently, like it's sacred or radioactive. This, he says, is the unapproved chart, the kind that isn't taught, the kind banned in Alexandria after a librarian predicted a senator's third mistress would leave him for a goat herder. You blink. Did it come true? He shrugs. Historians still argue whether the goat was metaphorical. He smooths the tablet's surface and shows you the layout. 12 houses, planetary markers, moon cycles, and a section labeled Do Not Interpret During Comets. It's very official and ominous. These tools weren't just hidden, he explains. They were forbidden. Why? Because they were too good, too precise, too predictive. Apparently, early astrologers believed if you knew too much, you might start questioning things, like whether your fate was actually fated, or if the stars were just passive aggressive dots. That, you're told, was dangerous thinking. He shows you a faded diagram of a celestial circle etched with red ink, the color of rebellion, he says. It looks like something between a spell and a board game. This chart could track planetary motion down to the hour. You gasp. The hour? He nods. Not just the day, not even the moon hour. I'm talking actual hour. This thing predicted the outcome of arguments, market crashes, and two broken betrothals. You lean closer and he slaps your hand, gently but firmly. These tools were banned for a reason, he hisses, because people started trusting them more than their priests, their kings, even their parents. He pauses. Well, to be fair, most medieval parents weren't particularly insightful. You ask how people got caught using forbidden charts. Ah, he smiles, they didn't. Not if they were smart. They read under cover of darkness, whispered predictions into soup, hid their charts behind false walls and beneath their beds, sometimes literally under their lovers. That got awkward quickly, especially during inspections. But the real trick? Code. You're handed a sample scroll, and it's nothing but poetry. Bad poetry. You're about to critique the iambic pentameter when he flips the page and shows you the cipher. Each phrase is a planetary code. My heart swells like the tide is actually Moon Trine Venus in the fifth house. Romantic, isn't it? You nod. You're not crying. You're just impressed. You ask if you can keep the compass. He laughs. No, but it'll keep you up at night wondering why it only spins when Mercury's being difficult. You tuck that thought deep into your psyche, and just as you're about to leave, he calls after you. Well, don't forget to wipe your feet. You're tracking Saturn's grumpiness all over the zodiac. You glance down. Yep, right on top of Scorpio. You wake up the next morning to find a horoscope slipped under your door. Handwritten, smudged, smelling faintly of wine and parsley. It reads, Mars envies you. The moon suspects you. Avoid goats today. You squint at the handwriting. Definitely the astrologer's. You wonder if he ever sleeps, or if he just stares at the sky until the stars blink first. Later, back in his chamber, which now smells suspiciously of burnt fennel, he greets you without looking up. So, he says, ready to learn why planets are basically medieval celebrities? You nod, careful not to sit directly on the zodiac floor again. You choose Libra this time. Feels neutral. He waves a hand over his scrolls like a game show host about to introduce the contestants. One by one, he taps them. Here's the thing, he says. Planets aren't just rocks floating in space, they have attitudes. You raise an eyebrow. Take Mars. Mars doesn't just represent aggression, he enjoys it. He's the guy who brings a sword to a poetry reading. You're informed that Venus is charming, but emotionally exhausting. Mercury is clever, but can't stop interrupting. Saturn is the grumpy old man yelling at celestial clouds. And Jupiter? Jupiter is generous, but with conditions. Like your uncle, who only gives you a gift if you agree to visit twice a year and help clean his wine cellar. He pulls out an ancient Babylonian chart and points to a note scribbled in the margin. Mercury acting out again. You ask who wrote it. Some priest with insomnia. Probably blamed Mercury for his laundry problems. You learn that these personalities weren't just metaphors. Astrologers really believed that the planets had moods, that they could get offended, play favorites, and even ghost you. Historians still argue whether this was genuine celestial belief or just an elaborate excuse for missed predictions. You ask what happens if you insult a planet. Oh, he says dramatically, you'll know. Your soup will taste like mud. Your dreams will be riddled with awkward reunions. And your sandals? Always wet. He tells you of one astrologer who compared Saturn to a lazy turtle. The next morning, all his ink had dried up and his clients canceled without explanation. Coincidence? Never, he whispers. You're told that ancient star readers developed entire etiquette systems for planetary interaction. You had to bow, mentally, before reading a chart, burn incense chosen by planetary preference. Mercury liked mint. Venus preferred rose. Mars didn't care, as long as it was spicy and involved yelling. Jupiter, you ask. He shrugs. Jupiter likes figs, always figs. You glance at the fig bowl beside you. You've been feeding him? I try, he says. He's moody when ignored. Apparently, astrologers believed these offerings helped sweeten the reading. If you buttered up Venus before a love prediction, she might be generous. If you didn't, she might pair you with someone who collects used chicken bones. It occurs to you that astrology was never neutral. It was deeply emotional, personal, messy, kind of like dating. And just when you think he's finished, he leans in again. What? There's one planet you must never flatter, he whispers. Uranus. You pause. He nods solemnly. Too unpredictable. Flatter it, and it might set your neighbor's barn on fire. Ignore it, and you just might win a melon. You don't ask follow-up questions. Instead, you leave the chamber quietly, bowing slightly, mentally, to Mars, just in case. Later that evening, a goat sneezes in your direction. You pretend not to notice. You're halfway through your barley porridge the next morning when a messenger drops a scroll in your lap and runs away like you've got the plague. You know the handwriting immediately. It reads, under no circumstances, read the 10th house during an eclipse, no matter what they promise you, no matter how much stew they bring. You sigh. Another warning. You head straight to the astrologer's chamber, where he's muttering something that sounds suspiciously like a chant against clients who don't tip. He doesn't look up. You're back, he says, which means either your chart scared you or you're thinking about the 10th house. You freeze. He slams a thick book on the table. Dust explodes into the air like it just lost a bet. The 10th house, he says slowly, is the house of power, public status, your reputation. Basically, everything you wish people would say about you when you're not in the room. You nod. Sounds important. And that, he says, is exactly why it's dangerous. Apparently, The 10th house has a flair for drama. It's tied to kingship, authority, legacy, and as such, every ambitious warlord, queen, or bored cousin with dreams of glory wanted their 10th house read. But here's the thing, under an eclipse, the stars get weird, real weird. During an eclipse, he says, you don't read the stars read you. He tells you about an apprentice who read a nobleman's 10th house during a solar eclipse. The reading said he'd rise to power by removing obstacles. The next week, the nobleman poisoned half the town council and claimed divine instruction. Historians still argue whether the astrologer was complicit, he says, tapping the table. Personally, I think he just needed rent money. You ask, what happens if someone accidentally reads the 10th house during an eclipse? Two possibilities, he says. 1. Chaos. 2. The person gets promoted to court astrologer immediately and then mysteriously disappears. He produces a list of names scratched out in charcoal. See? All former astrologers. Every one of them eclipsed. You're told that some astrologers tried to get clever, using water reflections, mirror tricks, or even reading through the shadow of a goat. Doesn't work, he says, just makes the goats nervous. In ancient Babylon, a special law banned public readings of the 10th house on eclipse days. In Egypt, it was taboo to even say the words 10th house near a tomb. And in early Rome, well, they didn't ban it, but astrologers mysteriously started investing in bodyguards. He leans in, voice low. There's a reason we don't talk about this in the open. Power attracts danger. And astrology, in the wrong hands, is like giving a toddler a dagger made of light. You shiver. Not because you're cold, but because something in the room just feels off. You glance at the sky outside. It's a little too gray, a little too still. The astrologer notices and immediately starts stuffing scrolls into his robe. You didn't read your 10th house, did you? You shake your head. He nods. Good. Keep it that way. Then he tosses you a handful of dried figs. For Jupiter, he says, we might need backup. You're hauling a burlap sack full of dried figs, Jupiter's favorite apparently, when the astrologer halts you in front of an archway. No markings, no windows, just a heavy velvet curtain and a smell like singed parchment and regret. He leans close. Before we go in, he whispers, you should know, astrology is political. You blink. You were expecting mystical, spiritual, maybe occasionally vague, but political. Oh yes, he says, pushing the curtain aside. One horoscope can topple a dynasty. 2, and you might start a war. The room beyond is cluttered with what can only be described as star gossip. Piles of intercepted royal charts, anonymous scrolls with dramatic predictions, and what appears to be a clay tablet labeled Don't Show the Duke. You're beginning to realize that in ancient courts, astrologers weren't just stargazers, they were influence peddlers, cosmic lobbyists with access to the one thing no one could argue with, the sky. He points to a cracked tablet dated centuries ago. This prediction, he says, was smuggled out of Nineveh. Said the king's brother had Saturn rising in treachery. Next thing you know, rebellion. You ask what happened to the astrologer. Banished, he says, or promoted? Depends on who you ask. Historians still argue whether that astrologer was genuinely insightful or just incredibly lucky with palace drama. You learn that astrologers often walked a razor-thin line between wisdom and treason. A favorable reading might get you a feast and a feathered hat. A bad one? Prison. Or worse, reassignment to the royal stable latrine. There's even a story from medieval Baghdad of an astrologer who accidentally predicted the caliph's favorite son would have a short but influential life. The next week, the son took an arrow to the shoulder and declared he'd start writing poetry. Everyone clapped nervously. You ask if astrologers ever made up their readings. He shrugs. Not made up, just creatively interpreted. You're handed a sample horoscope from a Roman court. Your stars suggest triumph, but only if you avoid chickens, cousins, and sea travel for the next lunar cycle. Vague enough to sound wise, he explains, specific enough to keep your head attached. You realize astrologers weren't just mystics, they were strategists, advisors, sometimes double agents, and the kings knew it. That's why royal natal charts were state property, locked away, studied, and updated like battle plans. Some rulers even employed multiple astrologers to ensure consistency and to cross check for treachery. Back then, the astrologer tells you, if three charts agreed, it was divine will. If they disagreed, someone got thrown into a well. You step around a pile of wax seals stamped with celestial glyphs, evidence of predictions that probably caused more drama than they prevented. Then he hands you a scroll titled Suggested Outcomes for Less Dramatic Rulers. It includes phrases like, the moon smiles softly upon your taxes. You shall be victorious in all goat-related matters. A season of gentle triumph awaits, unless it rains. You can't help but laugh. He winks. It's an art. You glance out the small round window. A storm is forming. The astrologer raises an eyebrow. That, he says, is Mars trying to cause problems again. You make a note to move your bed away from the window tonight. You're scrubbing ink off your fingers with what you hope is soap and not some kind of dried goat fat. When the astrologer turns to you and says, dead serious, all right, it's time you learned the first forbidden rule. You pause, hand midair. No, not the one about never interpreting the 10th house during an eclipse, he says. The first, the original, the one carved into the lintel of the sky reading temple of Sipar. You lean in, he lowers his voice. Never chart your own future. You blink. That's it? He nods gravely. It's like trying to give yourself a haircut in a windstorm with fire. You chuckle. He doesn't. This isn't just superstition, he says, setting down a scroll with your name on it, half finished. It's cosmic ethics. When you read for yourself, you don't see fate. You see what you want to see. Apparently, astrologers throughout history have repeatedly warned against self-reading. The Babylonians called it Murmutu, literally star meddling. In medieval Persia, it was rumored that one particularly smug astrologer tried to map his own future and ended up predicting he'd become immortal. He died 3 days later, slipping on a fish in the market. Historians still argue whether the fish was a metaphor. The astrologer adds with a smirk, you ask what happens if you accidentally read for yourself. He squints. Well, you start seeing patterns where there are none. You start bending reality to fit your desires. Before long, you're interpreting a sneeze as a lunar omen and asking the stars whether you should have lentil soup for dinner. He gestures to a drawer filled with half-burnt self-read charts. See these? All doomed. Either the astrologer vanished, changed careers, or ended up marrying someone who collected cursed spoons. You can't help but wonder if you could sneak a peek, just one tiny reading about your week. He shakes his head. That's how it starts. One peek becomes two. Then suddenly, you're in the forest, naked under a blood moon, shouting at Mars because your date canceled. You put the idea away. Deeply. Ancient guilds used to enforce this rule. In some cities, astrologers had to be paired with sky partners, essentially assigned buddies who read for each other. Trust was everything, and bribes were strongly discouraged, though rarely refused. In China, imperial court astrologers weren't even allowed to speak about their own charts. Not allowed. Not in ink. One was imprisoned for whispering bad moon coming during lunch. Besides, your astrologer adds, when you know your future, you stop living. You start managing fate instead of meeting it. That hits harder than you expected. The candlelight flickers. Somewhere, a dog barks at nothing. A single leaf drifts past the open window like a tiny cosmic reminder that maybe some things are better left unplotted. So, he says, handing you a blank scroll, write anything, just not your future. You think for a moment, then scribble, maybe the stars don't need to tell me everything tonight. He nods approvingly. That's more wisdom than half the constellations combined. Then he tosses you a piece of dried mango. For Mercury, he says, he likes it when people show restraint. You chew slowly. Not bad. You're quietly organizing scrolls by slightly ominous and definitely cursed when the astrologer bursts through the curtain holding something wrapped in layers of silk and suspicion. Whatever you do, he says, don't look at it directly. You freeze. He places it on the table, unwraps it delicately, and reveals a golden disc etched with concentric circles, planetary symbols, and what might be a frowning ibis. This, he whispers, is a royal natal chart. You lean in instinctively. He slaps your hand. No, not unless you want to wake up married to someone's cousin and in charge of a territory shaped like a fish. You sit back, appropriately alarmed. Apparently, royal birth charts were more than just astrological curiosities. They were classified documents, sacred, protected, and often fabricated to make monarchs look more celestial than they actually were. Pharaohs, he says, claim to descend from the stars, right? Well, their astrologers made sure the stars agreed. You learn that in ancient Egypt, the natal chart of a king was considered divine property. Only the high priest of Amun, or whichever god was currently in royal favor, was allowed to interpret it. Misreading it, or even leaking a detail, could earn you a quick trip to the afterlife. Sometimes they faked entire constellations, he says, just to say, look, the stars literally shape themselves into the king's nose. In China, imperial astrologers worked under constant threat of execution for incorrect forecasts, especially regarding births. A child born under inauspicious signs? That meant someone had to adjust the interpretation. Or, you know, the child. Historians still argue whether one Ming dynasty astrologer really claimed a solar eclipse was smiling to keep his job. The astrologer opens a secret compartment beneath the table and pulls out another chart, this one incomplete. Names scrubbed out, corners burned. Forbidden, he mutters. This one belonged to a prince who wasn't supposed to exist. Apparently, royal families often hid backup heirs. Their charts were created, then locked away, just in case someone needed a fresh destiny on short notice. You ask what would happen if someone read the wrong royal chart. Best case, he says, political confusion. Worst case, civil war, plague. Someone starts naming stars after their pets again. He points to an old scroll marked, "Do not copy." I guess how many copies exist? You shrug. 17. All slightly different. All claiming to be the real birth chart of Emperor Lapis III. You make a note. Never trust a chart without a seal, a signature, and at least 3 vengeful curses protecting it. Then he leans in. You know what they say. Never trust a ruler whose Saturn is in the 7th house and whose smile never reaches his eyes. You nod. That seems oddly specific. And if anyone ever asks you, to read a royal chart under a blood moon, he adds, you feign illness, lose your voice, or run directly into a beehive. Anything to get out of it. You stare at the golden disk, still faintly humming, like it remembers too much. Want to touch it? He asks. You shake your head violently. Ah, good, he says. That was a test. He rewraps the chart, seals it, and slides it into a hidden compartment labeled Definitely Don't Touch. The candlelight flickers again. You swear the stars outside blinked in approval. ChatGPT Janoi. It's raining the next morning. Not a gentle drizzle, but that special kind of sideways grumpy rain that seems to argue with rooftops. You arrive soaked, clutching a damp scroll, and the astrologer barely glances up from his table where he's knitting. Emergency planetary talismans, he mutters, holding up something vaguely scarf shaped and embroidered with Saturnian runes. Very itchy, highly effective. You nod, not sure if that's a joke or an actual curse. Then he taps the table. Today, he says, we talk about star-based sabotage. You sit straighter. That sounds spicy. There were rules, he begins. But oh, there were also loopholes. Apparently, in many ancient courts, it was strictly forbidden to curse someone outright, but misreading their chart just a tiny bit, perfectly deniable. He pulls out a case labeled Historical Shenanigans and spreads out several examples of astrological, let's call them errors of convenience. This one, he says, pointing to a chart of a minor noble, was told that Venus was in favor of his marriage to Lady Syra. You nod. Sounds promising. She was already married and pregnant. Oh. The resulting scandal, he explains, conveniently removed two political rivals and created an opening for someone's second cousin to rise to power. All because one astrologer suggested a slightly friendlier Venus. Historians still argue whether the prediction was a mistake or a very precise hit job disguised in celestial language. You learn that some astrologers developed a subtle vocabulary for this kind of sabotage. Phrases like, Jupiter casts a long shadow today. You should watch your back. Mars visits unexpectedly. Maybe check your locks. Saturn rests near your door. You're probably going to regret that business deal. You ask if this was ever illegal. Oh, absolutely, he says, but only if you got caught, or if your prediction was too accurate. Then suddenly, everyone thinks you're a wizard, and next thing you know, you're being asked to bless cattle. He shows you a wax tablet from a Hellenistic school of astrology, filled with shorthand symbols that essentially amount to, he's doomed, but don't say it directly. This, he says, is the passive-aggressive astrology of the ancients. A fine tradition. There were even entire fake horoscopes distributed as political tools, like one Roman emperor who had multiple conflicting charts printed to confuse rivals. One said he was destined for greatness. Another said he'd be mauled by a swan. Neither turned out to be technically true, but he did get pecked by a goose in Gaul. You laugh, but your astrologer frowns. Oh, don't underestimate waterfowl, he says darkly. Mars once appeared as a duck. You make a note. Avoid lakes during retrograde. He tells you about a secret guild of astrologers in Venice who specialized in emotional sabotage charts. Horoscopes crafted not to cause political ruin, but just to ruin your day. Small things. Your friend envies your cheese, or avoid mirrors after sundown. Petty, effective, and deeply satisfying to the sender. You ask if this still happens. He gives you a long, slow look. Let's just say, if you've ever read a horoscope that told you to remain calm during spicy conversations, Someone might have paid extra for that. A thunderclap rolls outside. The scarf on the table twitches. You look down at your own chart, half scribbled and slightly smudged from the rain. He smiles. Don't worry. I've made sure your Mars is well behaved this week. You're not entirely reassured. You arrive just after sunset, and the astrologer is pacing. Always a bad sign. He's muttering something about Venus being overly dramatic and the tragic misuse of planetary hours. You gently set down the candied figs you brought as a peace offering. He grunts, accepts, still pacing. We have to talk, he says, about timing. You nod slowly. Not just when Mercury is in retrograde timing. I'm talking about planetary hours, the secret calendar inside the calendar. He pulls down a heavy leather-bound tome labeled Absolutely Do Not Schedule Haircuts During Saturn Hour. The subtitle reads, Unless You Want Emotional Damage. He opens to a page full of swirling glyphs, sun, moon diagrams, and a list of weekdays that includes Mildly Haunted Tuesday. You learn that every day of the week is ruled by a planet, and within each day are planetary hours, segments ruled by the same celestial divas, taking turns micromanaging human events. Let's say, he begins, you send a letter during a Venus hour on a Friday. Boom, romantic, add roses, very poetic. You nod. Now, imagine you break up with someone during Mars hour on a Tuesday. That's not just a breakup. That's a declaration of emotional war. You lean back. This explains a lot about your previous relationships. He points to a diagram. The first hour after sunrise is ruled by the planet that owns the day. So Sunday begins with the sun. Monday, the moon. Tuesday, Mars, and so on. Then the hours cycle in a set order all day long, like moody celestial bartenders taking shifts. He hands you a scroll. It's a daily chart with tiny symbols and notes like Mercury hour, great for contracts, avoid emotional speeches. Saturn hour, taxes, funerals, general brooding. Moon hour, bake something, cry gently. Apparently, ancient astrologers used this timing to schedule everything: meetings, letters, duels, weddings, public baths, and even nap time. Historians still argue whether one medieval king lost a battle because he charged at sunrise during a Venus hour. The astrologer says, shaking his head, love and war don't mix. Ask any playwright. You ask if modern people still do this. He raises an eyebrow. You think your boss accidentally schedules performance reviews during Saturn hour? Oh no. You ask how people kept track before smartphones. Ah, he smiles. They memorized, or had assistants called horologists, literal timekeepers whose job was to watch shadows and say things like, Sir, it's now a Mercury hour. You may proceed with negotiations, but avoid sarcasm. You can't tell if he's joking. You hope he's joking. He shows you a logbook from the Abbasid Caliphate. Every royal decision, timed down to the hour. Even bathroom breaks. Especially bathroom breaks. Venus hour, he says solemnly, ideal for skincare, not for interrogation. You wonder aloud if this is all just superstition. He shrugs. Maybe. But if you've ever had a haircut go disastrously wrong and couldn't explain why, it might have been Saturn. You glance at your own hair. That explains February. Then he hands you a tiny amulet shaped like a clock face, each hour marked with a planetary sigil. Wear this, he says, and try not to insult Jupiter before noon. You leave with the amulet tucked inside your robe, a pocket scroll of planetary hours, and a growing suspicion that every awkward moment in your life may have been poorly scheduled. Behind you, the astrologer calls out, And don't sign contracts during the moon hour unless you want your roommates to get weepy. You're halfway through deciphering your planetary hour chart, currently moon hour, which explains the existential snack craving, when the astrologer drags out a large dust covered chest. It creaks open like a crypt that's mildly annoyed to be disturbed. Inside, robes. Not just any robes, robes that shimmer faintly in candlelight, embroidered with glyphs, stars, and what appears to be an apologetic salamander. You raise an eyebrow. Ceremonial garments, he says, because astrology wasn't just studied, it was performed. He gestures for you to try one on. You oblige. It's heavy, smells like lavender and forgotten scrolls, and fits like it was tailored by someone who thinks you'll be fighting a storm god before lunch. You learn that in ancient temples and courts, astrologers dressed for the part, not out of vanity, okay, maybe a little vanity, but because they believed the attire influenced the reading. Each color, material, and symbol was chosen to please certain planets, deflect others, and look sufficiently impressive to whoever was paying the bill. This gold trim, he says, flicking it, for the sun, keeps your confidence high and your ego manageable, usually. He digs deeper into the chest and produces a faded blue sash. Moon alignment accessory. Increases intuition. Also works as a tea towel. Apparently, Babylonian astrologers wore sky colored linen and lined their sandals with goat hair, because goats, it turns out, were considered lunar messengers. Historians still argue whether goats had any real astrological value, he adds, or if they were just particularly persuasive. In Greece, the Pythagoreans had robes stitched with numbers. Yes, literally embroidered math, which they believed harmonized their bodies with the cosmos. A bold fashion choice, especially at parties. And in Egypt, astrologer priests would wear white flax robes only if they'd bathed in sacred water, avoided onions, and not complained about the heat for 3 consecutive days. You ask if any of this actually worked. He shrugs. Well, no astrologer ever predicted greatness in dirty pajamas. He hands you a headpiece shaped like a tiny crescent moon. Wear this during lunar consultations. Unless Mercury's being petty, you try it on. It slides sideways. You look like a confused pastry. He approves. But the clothing wasn't just for looks. It was symbolic armor, warding off celestial interference and client skepticism alike. You learned of one astrologer in Al-Andalus who wore 7 layers, each one corresponding to a planet. He collapsed during summer solstice, but his predictions were eerily accurate that day. There's also a fringe theory that some astrologers used their robes as covert message boards, hiding predictions in the stitching or tucking notes in their sleeves. One robe in the chest has tiny constellations embroidered along the hem. You squint. They spell out, "Beware Leo, rising with a grudge." You immediately step away from the lion embroidery. Fashion, the astrologer says proudly, with function. He picks up a belt with a little sun medallion and hands it to you. Sun hour's about to start. Wear this. It'll help you speak with confidence. You ask what happens if someone wears the wrong outfit at the wrong planetary hour. He winces. Well, let's just say, Mercury once gave someone hiccups for an entire week during negotiations with the Venetian Trade Guild. You nod, suddenly very aware of your outfit. As you leave, robe flapping behind you, you realize something strange. You feel braver, possibly because of the belt, possibly because the moon hat is slowly sliding over one eye, forcing you to squint like a pirate who reads birth charts. Either way, you walk taller. The stars, after all, love a little pageantry. You return that evening still wearing the moon hat, partly because it's grown on you, and partly because removing it feels like it might trigger a cosmic audit. The astrologer nods approvingly. Good, he says. Tonight we deal with omens, the loud cousins of subtle astrology. You sit, somewhat uneasily. He lights a sandalwood cone. Somewhere outside, a donkey brays, as if on cue. He grins. See, that was an omen, or indigestion. Difficult to tell sometimes. You learn quickly that while horoscopes and planetary hours were refined, structured tools, omens were wilder, earthy, messy, and far more common among everyday folks who didn't have access to polished scrolls and embroidered robes. People saw meaning in everything, he explains. Clouds, animals, cracks in walls, the way your bread split when baked. He pulls out a clay tablet listing recorded omens from the Library of Ashurbanipal. Your favorite. If a goat stares at you while chewing and then walks away, expect betrayal from a red haired cousin. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor or an actual goat related incident. Omens were astrology's side hustle, used by travelers, farmers, and people too poor for a full chart but too paranoid to ignore signs. Dreams, spilled oil, howling dogs, itchy noses, all data points in the great celestial spreadsheet of life. He pulls out an ancient Roman omen wheel, a kind of zodiac meets roulette device. He spins it. It lands on bird flies west, favorable business deal, unless bird is wet. You nod solemnly. Of course. The astrologer explains how omens were read in layers. Context was everything. A dog howling at night during a waxing moon? Minor warning. Same dog howling on your wedding night under a waning moon? Pack your bags. In ancient Mesopotamia, there were professional baru, omen readers, who specialized in entrails, lightning strikes, and the behavior of sheep, especially the behavior of sheep. He hands you a scroll with a drawing labeled, Concerning the sheep that sat like a man. You ask, cautiously, what happened to that sheep? No one knows, he says, but the king canceled his trip to the coast. You also learn that omens were political tools. Again, a bad omen could delay a war, invalidate a coronation, or conveniently explain why someone fell down a well after questioning the tax rate. You glance at your own hands, a small ink stain shaped vaguely like a crab. Cancer, he says softly. Emotional day ahead. Probably soup involved. You ask if modern people still believe in omens. He laughs. Every time someone says, I just had a weird feeling, they're practicing omen logic, just without the sheep. He points to his window. Outside, a bat flutters past. Even now, he says, some stars don't speak through charts. They tap your shoulder through the world around you. You just have to notice. You ask how to tell if it's an omen or coincidence. He shrugs. If it makes you hesitate, it's an omen. You consider this as your moon hat slips down again. A passing cloud covers the moon for just a second. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbles. Not a roar, just a clearing of the throat. You don't say anything, but you tie your belt a little tighter, just in case. You're sitting cross-legged beside the astrologer's cluttered desk, casually sipping something he swears is Mars calming tea, which mostly tastes like cinnamon and a mild dare, when he taps a locked box with the tip of a quill. Tonight, he whispers, we talk about forbidden pairings. You raise an eyebrow. Like forbidden love? Worse, he says. Astrological combinations that should never be read together. He unlocks the box. Inside are dozens of thin ivory plates, each etched with symbols, planetary glyphs, and the occasional dramatic exclamation mark. These, he says, are the pairings that make the sky nervous. You're intrigued. He pulls out the first plate. Mars conjunct Moon. Sounds poetic, right? He says. But this combo, all emotion, no breaks. Wars have started under this alignment. Also, more than one dinner party disaster. Historians still argue whether the Great Lentil Riot of 1327 was due to famine, politics, or a misread Mars Moon conjunction during a neighborhood cook off. You learn that some astrologers refuse to even speak certain pairings aloud. They'd nod, gesture vaguely, or refer to them with nicknames like the Stompy Tango or the Celestial Elbow. He flips to another Saturn's Square Sun, Authority Issues, Ego Meets Grindstone. Excellent if you enjoy feeling like your dad is judging you through the cosmos. Apparently, this was the chart aspect most feared by royal advisors, especially if the king had a big birthday coming up. Then, Neptune opposite Mercury. Delusions meet communication. Ever try reasoning with a cloud? You nod. You once ran a group project. Exactly, he says. You ask if these combinations are truly dangerous or just inconvenient. He leans back. I name they're like cosmic friction. Not evil, just itchy. You rub them the wrong way, and the sky sends you a long, metaphorical rash. He shows you a scroll of handwritten notes, each a report from historical astrologers who dared to read certain combinations and then regretted it. One was convinced a Venus Pluto conjunction led to the spontaneous invention of dramatic poetry in a monastery. Another blamed a Uranus Mars square for an entire week of unexpected nudity in public forums. No further detail is given, probably for the best. Some astrologers, he says, even kept personal blacklists, combinations they refused to touch. One wrote, "If I see Mars in the fourth house again, I swear I'll join the Bakers Guild instead." You ask if there are safe combinations. He nods. Sun trine Jupiter? Delightful. Moon sextile Venus? Like cosmic chamomile. But those are rare. The sky loves drama. He hands you a tiny red book titled Pairings That Sound Nice But Aren't. Examples include Mercury with Uranus, genius or nonsense, sometimes both, often at once. Venus with Neptune, romantic until someone starts writing sonnets about soup. Mars in Libra, wants to duel but politely. You laugh, but he's already back to scribbling a chart for someone with Pluto in the seventh house. Big transformation energy, he murmurs, or a breakup, or both. Sometimes with fireworks, literal ones. You ask what you should do if you ever see a forbidden pairing in your own chart. He shrugs. Light a candle, eat something grounding, apologize to Mercury in advance. Then he smiles faintly, or you do what every good astrologer does, read around it. Focus on the nice bits, suggest a vacation, maybe a haircut. During the right hour, of course. You glance down at a chart half filled in your lap. There it is, Mars opposite Moon. The ink glows faintly under candlelight. You slowly close the scroll. Maybe you'll read that part later. The next time you arrive, the astrologer is humming softly while polishing a small obsidian mirror. It reflects the room a little too clearly, like it knows secrets you haven't told yourself yet. You sit cautiously. We're entering risky territory now, he says without looking up. Tonight's about astrological censorship. You blink. The stars got censored? Oh, absolutely, he says. You think only books and paintings got banned? Try telling a 13th century warlord that the moon says he'll lose a battle. That's a one-way ticket to accidental falling down some stairs. He pulls out a bundle of crinkled papyrus with entire constellations scribbled out in red ink. One margin reads, "Too gloomy. Use happier stars." You learn that astrologers throughout history were often required to soften predictions, especially for powerful clients. Rulers, popes, generals, they didn't want truth. They wanted confirmation, a celestial high five. Anything less could be considered treason. In the court of Louis the Fount, astrologers had to submit their forecasts in writing, with a backup copy submitted to the royal archivist. Disagreements? Interpreted as sabotage. Historians still argue whether one court astrologer was executed for predicting the wrong kind of eclipse or for not predicting the queen's bad haircut. The astrologer adds, "You ask how they got around the censorship." He grins and flips open a scroll full of lovely sounding nonsense. The sun shines upon your path, but some shadows must remain to define the light. Mars greets you with intensity. Channel this toward productive endeavors, like war or taxes. Venus is retrograde, but in a sexy way. That last one kept a poet alive during the 30 Years' War, he says. You ask if astrologers ever rebelled. He nods. Some went underground, wrote coded charts, published fictional predictions that just happened to mirror current events. He shows you one such poem, which he says was secretly forecasting the fall of a noble house, disguised as a love letter to the moon. Others, he says, became performers. They'd read charts in taverns using stage names. Less risk of jail, more risk of getting a tomato to the face. He pauses. I've had both. Prefer the tomato. You learn that in certain periods, especially during religious purges, astrology itself was banned, not just predictions. In 17th century England, astrologers were accused of witchcraft. One was jailed for printing a calendar that predicted rain. To be fair, the astrologer adds, it did rain for 3 weeks. People were already annoyed. Even today, he tells you, some astrologers code their meanings. A challenging lunar transit can mean heartbreak, eviction, or accidentally texting your boss instead of your therapist. You're handed a scroll of euphemisms and complex energies. You messed up. Rethink long-term plans. Chance you're fired. Unusual romantic potential. Do not call your ex. You ask if honesty ever worked. He sighs. Once, in Prague. I told a duke exactly what the stars said. He nodded, thanked me, and walked straight into a monastery. Renounced everything. Became a beekeeper. He stares out the window, lost in memory. His honey was terrible, he says, but his soul? Very peaceful. You ask what astrologers should do when censored. He shrugs. You speak softly. You write in riddles. You trust the stars, but you trust human ears even more. Then he hands you a quill. Now, he says, rewrite this chart for a particularly sensitive baron. Make it sound like triumph, but quietly warn him about his rash decision to buy a fleet of swans. You dip the quill in ink. This may be the most dangerous editing job you've ever done. You arrive to find the astrologer surrounded by tiny wooden figures, each meticulously painted with zodiac signs, planetary symbols, and expressions ranging from mildly concerned to actively scheming. He doesn't look up. Tonight, he mutters, moving Aries to face off with Venus. We confront the weaponization of astrology. You freeze mid-step. Oh yes, he says. The stars weren't always used for enlightenment or romance. Sometimes they were tools, sharp ones. He nudges a figure labeled Scorpio in the 10th house into a strategic position. People use charts not just to understand fate, but to manipulate it, or at least the appearance of it. You sit down carefully, knocking over a miniature Saturn. He writes it with a grunt. You learn that in ancient courts, some nobles paid astrologers not for truth, but for advantage. Want to discredit a rival? Publish a discovery that their birth chart aligns with disaster, or worse, public embarrassment. Historians still argue whether a Roman senator's entire career crumbled because someone forged a star chart showing he was born during an eclipse, while Jupiter wept. Apparently, just having a bad chart could turn you into a pariah. Wrong moon phase? You were fickle. Mars near your ascendant? Clearly aggressive. Saturn in your second house? Financially doomed. People might avoid lending you money, marrying your daughter, or sitting too close at feasts. Astrologers became political tools. A few powerful ones acted like PR consultants for destiny. Imagine today's spin doctors, he says, but with star maps and more incense. He opens a drawer and pulls out a customized chart, real date, altered time, 1 hour's difference, and the whole personality changes. From tyrant to philosopher, he says. Convenient, isn't it? There were even elite astrologers who trained in astro strategy, a lost discipline blending propaganda, symbolic suggestion, and veiled predictions designed to shape decisions without anyone noticing. He shows you a scroll with a royal seal. Inside is a horoscope for a newborn heir, meticulously worded to imply greatness and the strategic importance of a strong naval alliance. The king read it, nodded thoughtfully, and signed a treaty the next day. Coincidence or brilliant manipulation? Both, he says. Astrology often works best when it tells people what they already want to hear. But with celestial punctuation, you ask if any of this was ever exposed. Oh, often, he says. But deniability was built in. You just say, ah, but the stars are unpredictable. He leans in. One queen in Spain employed 3 astrologers at once, each giving different advice. She followed whichever matched her mood, then blamed the others if things went wrong. Smart, terrifying. Then there's the story of the astrologer who predicted his patron's enemy would die of a fever. 3 days later, the enemy was feverish, thanks to a bribe and some extremely suspicious soup. The astrologer? Promoted. The soup cook? Mysteriously wealthy. You ask how often this happened. He shrugs. As often as there were stars. People will always use the sky to justify whatever they already planned. Astrology just makes it poetic. He taps the wooden figures again. Aries falls over. Take a note, he says, handing you a scroll. Never read charts during a power struggle unless you're willing to become part of the struggle. You scribble furiously. Outside, thunder rolls. Venus leans just a little too close to Mars in the heavens above. Inside, the chessboard of tiny planets awaits its next move. You open the door gently, only to be met with the scent of burnt parchment and what can only be described as panicked a lemon balm. The astrologer is fanning a smoking candle with an astrological chart that's been lightly scorched. Ah, he says, coughing gently. Perfect timing. I was just experimenting with a ritual to redirect Mercury retrograde. You glance at the blackened edges of the scroll and decide to stand at a safe distance. Tonight, it seems, you're diving into the ritualistic side of astrology, where ink and intellect give way to incense, circles, and the occasional chicken feather. People think astrology is all math and observation, he says, waving away the smoke. But some schools insisted on participating in the cosmos, not just observing it. He retrieves a thin book bound in faded velvet. The cover reads, Conversations with Planets. Volume 2. You open to a page labeled Instructions for Appeasing a Grumpy Saturn. Step 1. Wear black. Step 2. Fast from legumes. Step 3. Offer a lead coin in silence. Step 4. Do not make eye contact with goats. Saturn is temperamental, the astrologer explains. You learn that in India, pujas, Niradish rituals, are still performed to pacify planetary deities, especially Saturn, Shani, Mars, Mangala, and Rahu, the lunar node with a flair for chaos. Offerings include sesame oil, dark cloth, and silence. Lots of silence. In Renaissance Europe, astrologers built orreries, mechanical models of the solar system, not just for show, but for ritual alignment. Turning the gears at specific hours was thought to influence real planetary moods. Historians still argue whether one Venetian astrologer tried to delay a lunar eclipse by spinning his orrery backwards, the astrologer says, pouring tea over a chart to cool it. Other traditions involve star baths, ceremonial dips in spring water during planetary alignments. One Babylonian text recommends bathing under a waxing moon while chanting softly in Sumerian and facing east, unless you've recently eaten onions. You write that down, somewhat disturbed by how often onions seem to anger celestial forces. There were also planetary invocations, chants that echoed the frequencies of the planets. Ancient Greeks believed the spheres literally sang, and humans could harmonize with them through voice and vibration. He demonstrates. It sounds like a sleepy bee apologizing through a flute. You nod politely, but not all rituals were benign. Some involved Star Wars, symbols drawn in ash or ink to block certain transits. He shows you one, a tangled mess of circles and lines meant to prevent unwanted pregnancies during a Venus-Mars conjunction. It didn't always work. You ask if rituals are still used. Oh yes, he says, just modernized, burning old love letters under a full moon, ritual. Making a wish when the clock hits 11:11, mini ritual. Not texting your ex during Mercury retrograde, supreme ritual. He stands, adjusts his robe, and chalks a small circle around his desk. Now, observe the Saturn neutralizing sigil, he says, dramatically tossing a pinch of salt into each corner. You nod, impressed, until he slips slightly on the final sprinkle and knocks over the teacup. Okay, he mutters. That's on me. Mercury's still a little spicy today. You help mop up the spill as he explains that the line between ritual and superstition is thin, often walked barefoot, and occasionally danced upon by hopeful poets. But, he says, rituals serve a purpose. They remind us that the universe isn't just out there. It's here too, in our breath, our tea, our timing. A little reverence never hurts. He hands you a talisman, copper, etched with your birth moon's glyph, and says, wear this next Tuesday. Saturn's watching. You leave feeling mildly blessed, slightly salted, and deeply wary of onions. You return just before dawn, when the sky is still sorting out its colors and birds haven't quite committed to chirping yet. The astrologer is already awake, staring into a cup of something herbal and vaguely judgmental. Without greeting, he gestures for you to sit. Today, he says, we delve into astrological exile. You blink. Like being kicked out by the stars? Worse, he murmurs, being out of favor, celestially homeless. You sip cautiously from your own tea, which tastes like regret with a hint of fennel. He opens a parchment covered in neat, obsessive rows. At the top, planets in dignity, detriment, exaltation, and fall. You've seen this before, but now he traces over one section. Fall and detriment. These are the placements astrologers whisper about, like they're discussing cursed antiques. Every planet, he explains, has a home, a place where it feels strong, confident, like it can kick off its boots and speak its truth. Then he taps the opposite columns. These are not those places. For example, the sun in Libra, polite, indecisive, afraid of confrontation, like a motivational speaker who keeps apologizing. Mars in Cancer, angry but emotionally fragile, like a knight writing poetry and weeping into his soup. Saturn in Aries, too fast, too reckless, like a dad trying to skateboard. Historians still argue whether one doomed king's Mars in Cancer was to blame for his refusal to lead battle from anything but a bathtub. You learn that astrologers often hesitated to mention these fallen placements unless asked directly. Even then, they'd pad it with phrases like an opportunity for growth, a challenging invitation from the cosmos. This placement builds character, slowly, through suffering. In certain eras, birth charts with multiple planets in exile were hidden, burned even. One medieval noblewoman's chart was found decades after her death, four planets in detriment. She'd been quietly deemed untrustworthy by the heavens and denied her inheritance. You feel a chill, suddenly worried about your own placements. He hands you a mirror, small, round, edged in copper. These planets, he says, aren't bad, just uncomfortable, like trying to write poetry in a war zone or host a dinner party during a plumbing emergency. You ask if people with these placements are cursed. He smiles gently. No, just invited to learn patience and improvisation. He shares the story of an astrologer in Alexandria who specialized in chart rehabilitation. She'd reframe detriments as metaphors. Mercury in Sagittarius, not scattered, adventurous. Venus in Scorpio, not possessive, passionate. Saturn in Leo, not rigid, regal discipline. Spin, he says, isn't just for politicians, it's for planets too. You try it yourself. Jupiter in Capricorn, ambitious and grounded. Moon in Scorpio, emotionally profound, like a moody lake that bites. He approves. Then he hands you a coin. On one side, a beaming sun. On the other, a droopy looking Saturn in Pisces, holding a wilted daisy. Keep this, he says, to remind you that exile isn't the end, it's just a different beginning. As you step outside, the early light hits your shoulders. You think of all the misfit planets trudging across awkward signs, still doing their best. It's strangely comforting. You too can bloom from weird soil. It's late evening when you return. Moon just climbing, the stars already gossiping in their constellations. The astrologer is standing in his garden barefoot, holding a weathered globe and humming what might be an ancient lullaby or just a confused scale. Without turning, he says, "Tonight we look at what's missing." You join him by a stone bench, careful not to disturb a snail making its way toward destiny. People assume astrology is complete, perfect, all seeing, he says, but it has gaps, blind spots, things even the stars keep to themselves. He hands you a scroll labeled Void of Course Moon. The name sounds like a medieval poetry band, but you soon learn it's far more sinister, at least to astrologers. When the moon leaves one sign and hasn't yet entered meaningful contact with another planet, he explains, she's void, adrift, unmoored. In such moments, tradition warns, do not start anything new. No buying, no proposals, no awkward emails to exes. Historians still argue whether a royal wedding in 1491 failed because the moon was void or because someone forgot the bride's name. You believe both. He shows you old nautical charts marked not with wind or tide, but with lunar voids, sailors, timing departures to avoid this quiet cosmic shrug. You ask what happens during these times. Things unravel, he says softly, or fade, or just never take root. You glance up at the moon. She seems serene, dangerous. But the moon isn't astrology's only omission. The astrologer brings out a chart showing intercepted houses, entire zodiac signs swallowed whole within the layout of a birth chart. People born with these often feel like something is missing, he says, a hidden room in their house, a locked drawer in the soul. He taps your shoulder. It's not doom, it's a puzzle. Then come the missing planets. Astrologers throughout history who insisted there must be another celestial body out there, explaining everything from chronic indecision to why goats are weirdly popular in prophecy. Some believed in a counter Earth, he says, others in invisible stars. One guy swore by a shadow planet called Lilith, said she explained forbidden desires and mysterious dreams. You ask if any of this is real. He shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe astrology, like people, is built on the beautiful lie that everything can be known. He opens a leather-bound book titled Uncharted Skies. Inside are scribbles, wild hypotheses, and one diagram showing a constellation that doesn't exist, or doesn't yet. He reads aloud from a marginal note. This energy is real, just not measurable. You feel a familiar itch, like realizing you forgot something, but can't name what. That's the gap, he says, nodding. It humbles us, reminds us the sky doesn't owe us clarity. You sit with that thought as the stars twinkle overhead, conspiring quietly. Even the cosmos, it seems, prefers to keep some secrets close. You find the astrologer in near darkness, save for a single candle flickering beside a stack of blank charts. He's not writing, not reading, just sitting. When you ask if it's a bad time, he shakes his head. No, just the perfect time to talk about astrological guilt. You sit beside him, cross-legged, as the silence hums between you. People don't think about it much, he says quietly. But astrology doesn't just predict things. Sometimes it haunts them. You frown. He continues. I've seen people blame the stars for who they are, for mistakes, for never trying. He opens a drawer and pulls out a folded letter, the parchment creased with time. It's a confession from someone who canceled a wedding after discovering her partner's Venus was square her Mars. They never spoke again, he says. She lived alone, read her chart every year, always came to the same conclusion. Not meant to be. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the room. Astrology, in the wrong hands, he says, can become a kind of elegant cage, a velvet prison where every failure is preordained and every risk dismissed because Mercury was retrograde. Historians still argue whether Emperor Rudolph II avoided rebuilding Prague's defenses because Saturn was transiting his fourth house. The siege came anyway. You ask if he's ever regretted a reading. He stares into the candle for a long moment. Yes, he says. I once told a merchant his financial houses were troubled. He took it as doom, sold his business, moved to the mountains, lived in fear of debt collectors that never came. You learn there's a whole field of astrotherapy now, helping people unlearn the parts of astrology that made them afraid to act, afraid to hope. Interpretation is everything, he says. The stars suggest, but you choose. He picks up a blank chart. You know what this is? He asks. You shake your head. A birth chart for someone not yet born. It contains every possibility. Joy, failure, love, terrible dance moves. but it can't force any of them. He lights another candle and begins drawing a circle. I include this in every beginner's reading now, he says. A reminder: astrology is not your jailer, it's your weather report. You chuckle softly. So, take an umbrella, he adds, but don't cancel the trip. You stare into the candle with him, watching the flame bend, waver, persist. You will be misunderstood, he says. You will mess up. And none of that is because Venus was grumpy last Tuesday. He presses a fresh chart into your hands. Start again, he whispers. This time, leave room for miracles. By now, your boots know the path to the astrologer's house better than you do. It's almost instinct. Left at the leaning cypress, past the rock that vaguely resembles Julius Caesar, then up the steps that complain more loudly each night. You knock, no answer. The door creaks open anyway. Inside, the candlelight is warm. The charts are tidied. The air smells like rosemary and something that might be hope or just cinnamon again. He's waiting by the window, gazing at the night sky as if trying to remember where he left his keys. Somewhere near Orion. You sit without needing to be asked. Tonight, you learn about the astrologers themselves, the ones history almost forgot, the outcasts, the obsessives, the whisperers of forbidden star lore who spent lifetimes chasing patterns across parchment and sky. Not all astrologers were sages in robes, he says. Some were madmen. Some were drunk. Some were just very tired. He hands you a scroll, thick, cracked, with ink so faded it's more suggestion than statement. Inside are names you've never heard. There was Isidora, he says, a Hellenistic rebel who refused to use the 12-house system, swore by a 13 sign theory based on lunar overlaps and seasonal drift. Historians still argue whether she was a genius or just very, very stubborn. Then there's Father Benito, a Spanish monk who secretly wrote erotic horoscopes for nobles under the pseudonym the Scarlet Star. No one ever caught him. His predictions? Startlingly accurate. And Chihan, a Ming Dynasty street astrologer who taught that fate was a tide, not a track. She read charts in alleyways, using stones, not ink, and predicted both eclipses and dumpling shortages with eerie precision. They were rarely respected, he says, but they shaped more lives than 1,000 emperors. You ask why they're forgotten. Because they didn't write the winning stories, he replies, or they died with their notebooks under their beds. He places a hand over a worn leather volume, his own. One day, someone will find this, he says. They'll laugh, or nod, or toss it aside. That's fine. We rid the stars, not for praise, but to witness. You sit together in a long silence, broken only by the soft creak of the night stretching its limbs. You remember everything now. The forbidden pairings, the dangerous predictions, the rituals, the regrets, the humor, the wonder, and the rules. The ones they never taught. The ones whispered only after trust was earned and tea was shared. You look at him. He smiles. You know them now, he says, but knowing is not the same as believing. The stars don't demand belief, only attention. He stands, walks to the shelf, and takes down a small silver box. Inside is a tiny rolled chart. Yours. You've walked the whole sky, he says, handing it to you. Now walk yourself. You step outside. Above, the stars blink slowly, patient, unmoved, familiar, but somehow no longer distant. You've seen their backstage. You know where they keep the jokes, the loopholes, the warnings scrawled in the margins. And still, they shine. And now the stars are quieter. You lie back, body heavy, thoughts soft. The air is cooler now, the night settled like a warm quilt. Somewhere, a breeze brushes past the window, curious but kind. The sky stretches above you, enormous and uncaring, and yet somehow intimate, like a friend who doesn't speak much, but always shows up. You feel the story still lingering, the lost charts, the echo of forgotten rituals, the delicate balancing act between knowing and wondering. There were rules, yes, forbidden ones, but even those were written in stardust, meant more to guide than to confine. You are not made of fate, you're made of choices and curiosity and probably some soup, depending on what you had for dinner. The astrologers who came before, they tried their best. Sometimes they got it wrong. Sometimes they got it eerily, uncomfortably right. But always, always they looked up. You think maybe that's enough. To notice, to listen, to stand beneath a sky that's far too old to explain itself and whisper, I see you. The stars don't blink in reply, but you feel them anyway. Your breath slows, your muscles unwind, one by one, like constellations fading from memory. Even the moon, ever watchful, begins her slow descent toward dreams. And in this quiet, in this space between planets and pillows, you realize something tender. You were never really trying to understand the stars. You were trying to understand yourself. And maybe, just maybe, you're getting closer. So rest now. Let your chart drift. Let the universe hold you gently. You're safe here. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.